like all different kinds of heroes. Some of the heroes that I loved as a kid were normal people. Some of them had supernatural powers. Some of them were even largely incompetent. I remember watching heroic cartoons as a kid, like G.I. Joe, the Transformers, He-Man, the Super Friends. I'm dating myself a lot with that, I realize. Inspector Gadget, and then this crazy guy, Thundar the Barbarian. Anybody remember that cartoon? Yeah, because if you're going to fight evil, then absolutely you need a onesie and fur boots to do that, right? I mean, that's the most protection that you could have. I remember reading a lot of comic books as a kid, and then later in life, I read G.I. Joe comics again, the X-Men, Spider-Man, and Gru the Wanderer. And he was an interesting character to me because he was the most deadly swordsman in all the world, but he loved cheese dip, and he was largely incompetent. If you fast forward to now, we're living in a great time for somebody like me that loves superheroes because, about just before the pandemic, you couldn't go more than 3 months, really, without seeing some kind of blockbuster superhero film that was in the theaters. My kids never really even had to ask me if we were going to go see it because from the time I see trailers, I sort of already have a plan in place as to how our family is going to get there to watch that. I think we love superheroes because they're good. A hero is someone who sees their situation and does the right thing, particularly when the outcome is uncertain. For the past month or so, we've been looking at the life of Joseph. Just to sort of recap some of those things, he was part of a crazy blended family. He was the 11th of 12 sons to his father, and he was the firstborn son to the favorite wife of his father's 4 wives. It gets kind of muddled in there. If you missed out on any of the previous sermons for the past 4 weeks, you can check those out online on YouTube, on our website, on our Facebook page. But just to recap those, kind of the main points were, our background matters, but it doesn't determine what God will make of our future. When things don't go according to plan, remember the story isn't over. When you're down, it helps to remember that God is working in much more than just your story. And even when it seems unfair, we are called to endure with integrity. Todd asked a great question early on. Was Joseph innocently ignorant of the implications of his words and actions, or was he a bit of a brat? So by a brat, I mean, talking to his family and saying, just in case you guys didn't know it, one day you'll all be bowing to me. I think about the sibling dynamics that exist in my family, and I've got to tell you, most of my kids would be quick to tell the others if there was bowing in their future. So I can see the brat idea, but we also don't really have a hint of malice later on in Joseph's life regarding that. So maybe not that one. Later on in his life, he's far too successful for me to buy the ignorance idea. So respectfully, to offer a third option. And I think that option is that Joseph was a hero and behaved heroically. When in doubt, he made the right choice. There was a supernatural element in his life, sure, the understanding and interpretation of dreams. But beyond that, he was a regular guy, just like you and me. More important than that, he trusted God. He had some fundamental beliefs about God that changed his life. And while Scripture doesn't explicitly say that, his actions sure do demonstrate it. Believing that dreams came from God, he shared those with his family. Believing that God valued sexual purity and morality, even for someone who'd been sold into slavery, he abstained when he was tempted and away from everyone who knew him. Believing that interpretation of dreams comes from God, even when you're wrongfully imprisoned, he shared that gift with his inmates. Believing that God is merciful and has a plan, he delivered his brothers and family from starvation when it was within his power, and it could even be seen as justified for him to avenge himself. He forgave. God had Joseph there for a reason, to do the right thing. The primary question that I think we can ask ourselves this morning is, what do we believe about the fundamental nature of God? The scripture passage for today is quite lengthy. It's not all going to be on the screen. Just the reference will be there. You can check it out later if you happen to follow along in our digital bulletin that's found in the YouVersion Bible app. It's all listed out there for you. But it's from Genesis chapter 39, the end of verse 20 through chapter 40, verse 23. And this is a little bit longer section, but bear with me. Let's read it together. I think there's value in us reading and hearing scripture together. It says, "So Joseph was there in prison. Remember, he'd been in prison because he was accused by his master's wife of making inappropriate advances towards her. And verse 21 picks up and says, "But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor with the prison warden. The warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that was done. The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. After this, the king of Egypt's cupbearer and baker offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guards, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guards assigned Joseph to them as their personal attendant, and they were in custody for some time. The king of Egypt's cupbearer and baker, who were confined in the prison, each had a dream. Both had a dream on the same night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they looked distraught. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We had dreams," they said to him, "but there's no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph. "In my dream, there was a vine in front of me. On the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms came out, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." "This is the interpretation," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are the 3 days, and in just 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. You will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand the way you used to when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well for you, remember that I was with you. Please show kindness to me by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison, for I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I've done nothing that they should put me in the dungeon." When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was positive, he said to Joseph, "I also had a dream. 3 baskets of white bread were on my head. In the top basket were all sorts of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." "This is the interpretation," Joseph replied. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. In just 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from your body and hang you on a tree. Then the birds will eat the flesh from your body." On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he gave a feast for all his servants. He elevated the chief cupbearer and the chief baker among his servants. Pharaoh restored the chief cupbearer to his position as cupbearer, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But Pharaoh hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had explained to him. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. I was talking earlier in the week with my son Matthew about the opportunity that I have to speak this weekend. Told him a little bit about this part of the section of Joseph's life that we'd be focusing in on. And his response was, "That's it?" And I think that's kind of our response too. Like, so what? What does this story mean for us? It's a great story. It has interesting turns. If you look at the life of Joseph, overall it makes us thankful that we don't live back then, when evidently if your sibling made you mad, killing them or selling them was a viable option. I'm also thankful not to live where overt slavery happens. The very first story of God's interaction with man was about setting him in a good place. And then when he broke that one rule that existed, God wiped him out of existence and started over, right? No, that's not what God did. He provided covering for him and let him know what the consequences would be, and he provided a way back. We see discipline and restoration, truth and grace. From Genesis, the first book of the Bible, to Revelation, the last, one by one, the Bible tells the stories of the failures of mankind. If humankind are the protagonists of the story, it's a bit of a downer. But we need to remind ourselves that God is the main character here. He's the hero inviting us into a relationship despite our inability to live up to the standards that he established. He steps in and we aren't destroyed. In fact, we're honored and we're adopted into a royal family as beloved heirs, and he involves us in the redemption of the world. We could ask it lots of different ways, but I think it all boils down to this. Do you believe that God is good? That his actions and motivations, his intentions, come from a place of unmitigated goodness? And I think that might have been Joseph's actual superpower. That at the core of who he was, he believed God to be objectively good. And so we see him doing the right thing because he trusts in God's goodness. If God is good, then we can trust him. Every message that we share together on the weekend, every time we sit down to discuss God, and living in relationship to him. And in many ways, it begins with what we believe to be fundamentally true about him. If he's good, then even if we don't understand what's going on, we can trust. If he's good, then in the midst of pain, we can have peace. If he's good, then when he asks us to do something or adhere to a standard, we can know it's for our good, even if we don't like it or agree with it or it goes against what we desire. If he's good, then we can know that a chapter of our lives isn't the whole story in his hands. Joseph did the right thing, and bad things happened to him initially, then a glimmer of hope, and then more waiting followed after that. Not only did he do the right thing, but he got accused of doing the exact opposite of the right thing and received punishment for that. Even when it looked like a dead end, God had Joseph where he was for a purpose. How are you framing your story? How am I framing my story today? Are we turning a chapter into the whole story? Think about the things that Joseph could have said. I told the truth about what I saw from God, and I was abandoned. God can't be trusted. I was abandoned by my family. They even thought about killing me. Family isn't a safe or a good thing. I was faithful to God's moral standard and went to jail for it. God doesn't save, and obedience leads to punishment and suffering. I served others by interpreting their dreams, and they forgot me. Serving is worthless. Why should I extend myself? I think what he actually said, what he realized in these circumstances were, who else was having prophetic dreams and interpreting others' dreams? Who else did his father favor? Did his brothers actually kill him? Who else did Potiphar put in charge of his house? Who else stood up to temptation with his master's wife? Who else was in charge of men that were connected to Pharaoh? Who else was interpreting dreams? Who else was uniquely positioned to save the original family of Israel that would go on to become the nation of Israel? Even when it's dark, God has a plan, and Joseph ended up in some pretty dark places, darker than most of us have seen. Living in obedience to God, resting in his goodness, honors him and makes the story of their life worth telling, and that's how we step into his plan. I think a few questions that are worth asking ourselves today in light of Joseph's story are, when is it justifiable to say that God has abandoned you? When is it justifiable to sin? When is it justifiable to be unloving? When is it justifiable to withhold the truth? When is it justifiable not to forgive? Do we love our families the way Joseph loved his, or do we respond with reciprocity? I don't know about you, but sometimes when people hurt me, I look for ways to write them off. Admittedly, I haven't been hurt, horribly badly in my life by others. I don't necessarily look for ways to hurt them back, but I do sometimes look for ways to pull back from them a bit and to just not care about them anymore, to be indifferent. I certainly don't look for ways to bless them. But stories of retaliation aren't inspiring, right? I mean, they make our blood boil. They satisfy our ravenous desire for justice. They sell millions of dollars worth of movie tickets every summer. But they don't really cause us to look within ourselves and see if something needs to change. I'd like to consider this morning the story of Ava Moses Core. And I put a link in our Facebook page where you can watch a video about her. It should be live about 11 o'clock today if you want to check that out. It's a really great story. But after Joseph Mengele, who was called the Angel of Death, joined the Nazi Party in World War II, he was assigned to Auschwitz. He was tasked with helping the Aryan race to increase and did genetic research on human subjects, focusing mainly on twins. When Ava arrived with her family, she and her sister were identified as twins, and at the age of 10 years old, they were separated from their family, never to see them again. Some days they were stripped and measured to identify differences in their bodies and record data. Other days they were given unknown injections to see how they would react. These experiments would lead to the cancer that eventually claimed the life of her sister Miriam many years later. In 1945, they were liberated by the Soviet Army. Years later, Ava was invited to speak on the subject of the Holocaust, and the event organizer suggested she appear with a former Nazi. And that Nazi was Dr. Munch, who had been present during the experiments conducted on her in the Holocaust. He even signed the death certificates of those that had been killed in the gas chambers. They met in 1993, and Ava asked him to sign a document saying that he had been there when those great atrocities happened. He was remorseful and agreed to sign. She wanted proof of the terrible things that had happened to her and her people for when others tried to say that the Holocaust didn't actually happen. She wanted to thank him for doing this, but didn't really know how to thank a Nazi. So she decided to forgive him in a letter that she wrote. In her own words, she said, "I discovered that I had the power to forgive. No one could give me that power. No one could take it away. It was all mine to use any way I wished." This led to her being ostracized by many other survivors. After that experience, she even did a mental exercise of forgiving Dr. Mengele for the atrocities that he had committed as well. I've never been hurt like that in my life. But her story is a reminder that forgiveness, radical, incomprehensible forgiveness, is possible. So are we a forgiving people? Are you using your gifts for him? A couple years ago, I heard about this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And it stuck with me because I just think it's funny. But it's the cognitive bias in which people believe that they are smarter and more capable than they really are. You can summarize it by saying mediocrity is greatness in the mind of the mediocre. As a younger man, I thought I was much better than what I actually am, particularly at music. As I'm growing older and as I've heard more musicians, I realize that I'm not that great at a lot of things, but particularly at music. It's an objective measure. I don't need counseling. I don't need affirmation. Most days, I have peace about it. Some days, though, I'd love to not really ever sing again. I'd love to just hide the fact that I know anything about music. And on those days, I'm reminded of the parable of the talents. That's the one that Jesus told about the master who had entrusted 3 of his servants with 10, 5, and 1 talent. As a kid, and sometimes as an adult, it always confused me. I wish they had just said with money instead of talents, because as a kid, you think, you hear talents, you think, I've got 10 different talents I can do, or 5 different talents, or 1. But really, it's just about money. And the idea behind the story is that we're entrusted with something, and we're responsible for that. The 10 and the 5 guys doubled theirs, and the 1 guy just hid his. His master ended up condemning him for that because he was responsible for that. He should have done something with it. When you've been entrusted with something, you're accountable and responsible for that. Joseph's first round of dreams led him to be kidnapped, led him far from home, to be a slave and in jail, and even in that situation, he kept using his gift. If you serve others and they forget you or betray you or are ungrateful, should you stop serving? Ephesians 6 says, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly, as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one of you for whatever good they do, whether they are a slave or free." In a real way, when we serve others, the object is God and not man. So are you serving? If you're following God's standards and are vilified or persecuted for it, if bad things happen to you because of obedience, is that an excuse not to obey? Related to this, how much energy do we actually put into resisting temptation? Joseph ran for it. 1 Corinthians 6 says, "Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You're not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore honor God with your body." In 1 Peter chapter 2, it says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Dear friends, I urge you, as foreigners and exiles, to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and commend those who do right. For it's God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor. Slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it's commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God. But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were like sheep going astray, but now you've returned to the shepherd and overseer of your soul. You know, we could preach a whole series on that passage and on the things that it says there. I think some other questions that are worth asking this morning based on the story of Joseph are you following to the point that things in your life are getting uncomfortable? Are you responding in an expected way to situations around you, or do you respond with the love of God? Are you responding in a way that says you trust God to be good and trust in his goodness? That section in Peter talks about righteousness, and what is righteousness? He says that we should live for it, so what does that actually mean? The definition of it is simple. It says acting in accord with divine or moral law, free from guilt or sin. There's a second definition that waters it down a bit. It says, is morally right or justifiable. I don't like that one because I'm pretty good at justifying my actions. I need the objective righteousness that's found in God. So, do I know God's word well enough to identify when it challenges the culture around me or the things that I believe? When I read the Bible and I come to a part that I don't agree with, do I look for loopholes, or do I have the humility to say, God is good, he loves me and knows more than I do, he sees the world in a way that I don't, so I must be wrong. God isn't a buffet that we can pick and choose from. Am I creating pockets in my life that I'm not allowing God access to, that I'm not allowing him to change? In the workplace, am I treating coworkers or subordinates or superiors in a way that they notice something different about me? Or is there a different me there because I think that's what the job requires, that me that's not really affected by grace? In the midst of uncertainty, betrayal, brokenness, and pain, God is with us. He's empowering us to live differently. Sometimes we get to see the why behind things that happen. Again, the conclusion of the story of Joseph is great. I hope you can catch those next few messages. Sometimes we don't see the why. If people around you aren't noticing something different, and if the circumstances around you aren't changing, could it be that maybe you aren't following as closely as you think? Could it be that I'm not following as closely as I think? There's freedom in realizing just how good God is. His laws bring life and are for our good. His word teaches us who he is, and his laws and standards for our good. He has a good plan for us. He can use every circumstance for good, and I want to respond to the world around me differently, to make morally right choices when I'm tired and isolated, to love and forgive radically like Joseph did, and to serve and use my gifts, no matter how small, with supernatural power and perspective, trusting God to use that for his glory.